right, welcome back to another Crypto Vagabonds Q&A. Just remember that whatever we produce in any platform, not just this one, is just content for your information, educational, and entertainment purpose only. Nothing that we say is to be considered financial tax or legal advice. Remember that this Crypto Q&A does occur every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Of course, you can also interact with us in Clubhouse, Monday to Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern Time, and obviously here in YouTube, Instagram, and X. Today, we're going to be talking about Russia's geopolitics. And before I go into this presentation, I need to make a few disclaimers. I am not endorsing the actions of Vladimir Putin. I'm not endorsing the actions of Zelensky. I'm not endorsing the actions of any war, any conflict. I'm just trying to explain to you how the mind of Vladimir Putin may work, or what are the challenges of Russia, and what the challenge that anyone that would have to be the political leader of Russia would have to take into consideration. I'm not endorsing, I'm just sharing with you some insights that may play a role if you want to judge the actions of the political leaders. Now, the roadmap of the discussion of today is based on Mackinder. Now, Mackinder wrote a book, which I recommend you guys reading, and he talks about the importance of Asia. And I'm going to get more in depth of his view and his geopolitical view of the world and how he sees the world going through different phases in this presentation, in this video today. Then I'm going to talk to you about the background of Russia's geopolitics. We're going to be looking at geography of Russia and geopolitical challenge of Russia. Then we're going to be talking about the strategies and also the different ethnic groups that compose Russia. So it's just an introduction for you to know a little bit more about Russia. Now, according to John Mackinder, which is the guy who inspired me to make this presentation, there is a geopolitical importance of Russia, and that is, of course, intrinsically connected to his own theory. And if you do not know about this guy, I highly recommend you should read his books. He lays it out very clearly, and he's right on the money, at least according to my view on his book. Now, talk about the geopolitical pivot of history. And of course, he was an Oxford professor between 1904, and he authored a document titled The Geographical Pivot of History, and his focus is on Russia and in Asia. Even though his focus seems to be on Russia, to me, when I read the book, it felt more to me like his focus is the importance of Asia as a continent, and we're going to get more into that as we go. Now, Mackinder divided the history of the world into 3 different epochs, and those epochs, of course, are all associated with Christopher Columbus and the discovery of the American continent. So the first epoch that he talks about is the pre-Columbian, and he's talking about how important it was, and he emphasizes a lot on the invasion of Asia and Europe and everything that happened before the discovery of America. So that is pre-Columbian epoch. And then, of course, the epoch after that is the Columbian epoch, where European expansion occurred, and of course, the discovery of navigation, new navigation routes, and the importance of the Navy, and the importance of the water, and the importance of marine transportation after Columbian. And of course, the third part is, of course, post-Columbian. So pre-Columbian, it was pretty much invasion, people using horses, very limited means of transportation on the land. And then, of course, growing the importance of the sea. And then he's talking about eventually, after we expand as much as we could expand on the sea, we're going to pay attention again, and it's going to be more important how the ground transportation will change the world. So we're going to go from land to sea, back to land. That's another way to look at his theory. And of course, if land is going to become important, we're going to be talking about where is the biggest massive piece of land. So he's talking about the territory, which will be the center of the world, and that territory would be Asia or Eurasia continent, because of the massive amount of land. Of course, this map is not to scale. This portion here is not the size. The largest, continuous amount of land is the Eurasia continent. So if you went from the importance of the land, the importance of the sea, which is the Columbian era, once we get channels and great means of transportation on the sea, we're going to again focus on how can we improve the continental land transportation. And then whoever controls the heart of the biggest portion of land would be able to control the world. It's like in a chessboard. Whoever controls the center of the chessboard would have greater control of the world. And that's his theory. And if you look at actions of the big powers in history, we're going to see that they are paying attention to the theory of Mackinder. So whoever controls a substantial amount of population, ample resources of the heartland of Eurasia would be able to conquer the world by conquering the center of the world. If you control the center of the chessboard, you pretty much control the entire board. And if you control the center of the heartland, you'll be controlling the entire world, especially now where we have bullet trains and China coming with the Belt and Road Initiative. You can see how the theory of Mackinder is being taken into account by the greatest leaders of the planet. Now, the land he's talking about is here, Eurasia. Now, it's important to understand how this Eurasia continent is, geographically speaking. And also going to be focusing mostly in Russia, because what happened is this green area that you guys see here in Europe is pretty much flat. Russia's biggest challenge is the fact that Russia is mostly flat. There's a division here of the Ural Mountains, which I think is the biggest relief to the entire Russia. But everything here towards the west is pretty much flat. You have this division here in the center, and then you have Asia on the other side, and then you have Europe. And of course, if you're talking about other divisions, you have like Turkey with the Bosphorus. But in the terms of the massive amount of land, the Ural Mountains are the mountains that pretty much cut this entire continent in two parts, Asia and Europe. Now, if you live in a place which is mostly flat, what you need to do is you need to conquer territories until you find natural obstacles that defend your land. And this, for instance, is one example of China. Most of Chinese people live in a very small territory of China, which is here towards the east. Over 90% of China is pretty much not populated. But why is that? Because China has geographical obstacles. Russia does not have those geographical obstacles. That's why Russia's only way of defense is to expand. And of course, if Russia is the biggest massive piece of land and they control the heart of Asia, Russia may become a strong power in the future. And that was the purpose of Russia in the past. And of course, the West doing all that. So more on the geographic of Russia. So you have here the steppes, which is a vast flat territories with low vegetation, serving as a major passage for Asian movements and provide, of course, extensive access to the land. The extensive access to land is something that works both ways. It is great to have access, but it's also a vulnerability which can be exploited by your enemies. And that's why Russia's history is about invasion after invasion and conflict after conflict. So once you have, again, that vast flat land, you be exploited, you be conquered, you be dominated. And that's the history of Russia. So Russia has to expand in order to prevent itself from being exploited. It was attacked by the Mongols. It has been conquered for 240 years. And the history of conflict until Russia expands so much to the point where they actually gain geological defense, such as mountains and so on. So the Russian state, and here's again where it may seem like I'm defending Vladimir Putin, the Russian state began with the Principality of Kiev. So Kiev is the origin of Russia. That's why it is difficult for Russians to have their capital and the country that holds their capital go to the other side of the ledger, because the origin of Russia is Kiev. And then, of course, then it was too exposed. They went more into Moscow, and that became, but you see routes here where Russia is vulnerable. Now, of course, the route on the north is less vulnerable in winter because the sea freezes. Everything else are routes for the Mongols, are routes for people to invade Russia, and that's why they need for expansion. So here's another map that shows more of Russia, and the expansion of Russia is slowly trying to get expansion territory, and here is the Ural Mountains that cuts the continent, one side Europe, the other side Asia, and that's why USSR, it created that buffer to protect Moscow. And then, of course, Poland had the same situation. I think I made a video about Poland, explaining about the geography and the geopolitical challenges of Poland. Link for that video on the description. But it's important to understand that expansion was the only way of defending Russia, or a strategy for self-defense. Now, once you recognize the imperative nature of Russia and why they have to conquer the territory, you understand why they became so massive, and now they have to defend. Once you get this territory, which is vast, you have the obligation to defend it. Now, the issue we're going to see now is that as you expand to a large territory, you have other challenges. And those other challenges would be, of course, ethnic groups. And here's a map of Russian expansion and how Soviet Union and those countries such as East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria worked as a buffer And why is it worry for Russia now to see that those territories became NATO and the West is coming closer? And make no mistake, the idea that NATO is expanding towards Russia is because they know that whoever controls the center of Asia in the future would have full dominion of the world. And they see that, of course, with China, for instance, the Belt and Road Initiative. So once Russia got to the Soviet Union, that was the limit where the West say, we need to do something about this because they expanded too much and they're having too much influence on the extended territories. They had influence further on the Baltic Sea. With the Soviet Union, they had more of the Black Sea as well. And there was a fear in the West that if they continue expanding, as for instance, even Yugoslavia, they start to have access to the Mediterranean Sea and so on. So this is just a map to show you guys Russia and Soviet Union. Now, of course, once you get that large territory, you have another challenge. And that challenge is the diversity, the ethnical diversity of the territory and how you keep that together, because not all of them are friendly to one another or they tolerate one another. It's important to understand that Russia is mostly Orthodox. There's a branch of Christianity which is not Catholicism and it's not Protestant. It's a whole different thing. One of the biggest difference they have, for instance, they do not celebrate Christmas in December. They celebrate their Christmas in January. So it's a different religion. But of course, once they expand, you start to have too much diversity of ethnic groups, and you need to make sure that those groups agree with one another or live in peace with one another. So Russia is now divided into 8 federal districts and only 85 federal subdivisions. Now, here's a picture of the different ethnic groups in Russia. We're going to be talking about one by one. Those are not all, but those are the main ones. So Russia is ethnically diverse and encompasses no Russian people with different cultures and different religions that are not Orthodox. They also have different languages, and we're going to be talking about that as we go into this. So yes, 77% of the population are Slavic language, which could be considered Russians. They live across the entire territory, and they're very numerous in European Russia. Then we have the Tatars, which are 3.7%, and they speak Turkic language, and they live across European and Russian. And then we have the Bashkir, which is 1.1%, and they also speak Turkic language, and they live across European Russia. Those are different groups. We also have the Shuvash, which is about 1%. They speak a Turkic language, and they live across European Russians. And then we have the Chechens, which are, I think, becoming a problem. I think the leader died this year, and that's something that Vladimir Putin is going to have to deal with. But they speak a Caucasian language, and they live across the Caucasus. And then you have the Nenets, which is 0.2% of the population, and they speak Uralic language, and they live across regions of Siberia. Again, there are other groups, and you can see here, these are Musks. There are Muslim population as well in Russia. There's also a larger Jewish group who lives in Russia. As a matter of fact, I think 15% of the population of Israel speaks Russian because the amount of oligarchs and Jewish ethnic groups present in Russia. Now, of course, post-Cold War shrunk Russia a lot. And that is a moment where Russia became weaker. And there is this drive of Vladimir Putin and the Russian population to expand again to become less vulnerable. You can see here, they not only lost allies, those allies went to the opposite side of the ledger, such as NATO. And again, NATO was created to oppose Soviet Union or to oppose Russia. So that's why Russia has a great concern as NATO comes too close to Russia, because once it comes too close, they know it's a matter of time before they lose their territory. And one thing here, there's no such thing as we're going to put military forces on your border and we're never going to use them against you. Borders are changing constantly. We see that happening now between Russia and Ukraine. We see that happening with Israel and Palestine. We're going to be seeing that happen in Asia. We see that happen in India. Countries are going to always be fighting for changing borders and expansion of their territory. That is something that we're never going to see the end of. Not as long as we're going to survive. Maybe beyond our lifetimes, but not now. So of course, Russia's main strategy is to seek expansion. And that's pretty much the way that they address and mitigate any threats and challenge, because it is a large territory and either you continue to expand, especially because of the geographical challenge that you have. You do not have geological borders. One example I can give to you is Switzerland. Switzerland is a lot of mountains. Switzerland doesn't need to expand because they have a lot of geological borders that protects the territory. That's why World War I, no one touched Switzerland. World War II, nobody touched Switzerland. Also, the population is heavily armed. But this is just one example on how the geographical challenges for invasion does help you. Russia does not have that. So their only strategy is to expand until they hit those natural geological walls. Now, besides all of this territory, there's another thing which I'm not mentioning, which are the resources that contain in this territory. Russia is one of the largest producer of energy commodities on earth. They're one of the largest producer of petroleum. They're one of the largest producers of natural gas, not to mention nuclear technology. So it's not just the territory alone. There's a lot of resources that Russia and Russian leaders have to defend against invasion and against foreign attack. So I want to give you a recap. We talk about Mackinder and the geographical pivot in history, dividing the history in three parts. Pre-Columbian, where focus is on the land, invasion, wars in Europe. Then Europe expands to America, post-Columbian period, and then in Columbian period, we have the importance of the sea. Once we pass the importance of the sea, there will be a focus on the importance of the land and how can we better transport and move goods on the land. And since the largest portion of land is Eurasia, whoever controls of the heart of that land will be in control of the world. And of course, we talk about slightly, very briefly, on the background of Russia geopolitics. I couldn't do much in 15 to 20 minutes. And then I speak about Russia's strategy, how the only plausible strategy is expansion. And of course, the challenge of Russia having to deal with many ethnic groups. When you have many ethnic groups, one thing I forgot to mention is you need to have a strong leader to keep those ethnic groups under control. That's the only way to do it. And if you want to see one example of that, NATO is exactly that. Europe was in constant conflict before NATO. And then US comes as the head of NATO, a strong leader, and brought peace to Europe. But if you look at Europe before NATO alliance, it was always conflict. So when you have different ethnic groups, you need a strong leader in order to keep those groups from fighting with one another and united under one strong identity, under one strong leader. I hope this made sense to you guys. And if you want to find out more about those things and become more in control of your money and start your journey towards what I call financial sovereignty, please consider joining the Academy. Link for that on the description below. With this, I will let you guys ask me questions. So if you like the video, like the content, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, click the notification bell, and see you guys on the next video, on the next presentation. Now it's time for the Q&A. Kaboom. Goodbye.